Hello and welcome to Craftwork, a podcast by writers for writers.
Craftwork is recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Wolastoqiyik, the people of the Wolastoq River. I'm Miriam Riche.
And I'm Mike Thorne, will be your co-hosts. The music for this podcast is composed and recorded by Randy Nickel Schroeder.
Fawn Parker is the author of 5 books, including novels What We Both Know, nominated for the Giller Prize, and Hi, It's Me, nominated for the Writers' Trust Atwood Gibson Prize, and the poetry collection Soft Inheritance, which was awarded the J. M. Abraham Atlantic Book Award and the Fiddlehead Poetry Book Prize. Her work has been published in the Walrus, Hazlitt, Literary Review of Canada, and elsewhere. Fawn is a PhD candidate at the University of New Brunswick and the Poet Laureate of Fredericton. Hi, Fawn.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I thought it would be fun to start with the question, what were some of the books that first got you excited about reading or writing? What were some of your first literary loves as a child or an adolescent or teenager?
I think I had a bit of an unconventional journey into being a literary person, or at least a reader. But I remember in high school, I read a book called This All Happened by Michael Winter. It was part of a Canlit unit, and I had never heard of him, but something about his book, I think it was a fictional memoir, which I actually went on to write myself. And something about it was just so moving and so real. And I loved this blend of, I think he does a great job of capturing what his community feels like. He writes about St. John's in Newfoundland while casting that in a fictional world. And so that was sort of the first time I realized something like that could be done in literature. And I think we were then assigned, maybe not with that book, but to mimic somebody's style and write our own piece. And I ended up choosing that book. So I do consider that a very formative piece that I read and then sort of copied as a teen. And I was very affected, I'm embarrassed to say, by the alt-lit era, very heavily contemporary online, lots of reference to like iPhones and just sort of injecting like young online culture into literature. And I've definitely outgrown that, but I think it was a foundation for me that I'm sure I'm still somewhere on top of.
We often hear you use the word like fictional memoir, and I know like alt-lit kind of maybe didn't pioneer, but like popularized autofiction. For example, Hi, It's Me. To me, that's like classic autofiction where the narrator's name is Fawn Parker too. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's you, but do you think of all writing as a form of autofiction, regardless of whether or not that's the label that is being applied to it?
Definitely not all fiction. I'm sure that argument could be made in a way that I would agree with, but I don't personally see all writing as that kind of diaristic, recording my experiences and thoughts. Definitely with Hi, It's Me, that's what was happening. I think of it sort of as an emotional memoir. It's everything I felt when that happened in my real life, but with fictional characters, fictional situations that kind of spiral into the surreal. So it's not recorded events that happened to me, but it's sort of what that felt like. And that's where the truth for me is. I do definitely draw on my own experiences and emotions in fiction, especially as I'm writing capital F fiction and sort of inventing a whole world. I think injecting experience is sort of unavoidable. So maybe that does mean I do think that to some degree, but I think the word autofiction became a bit controversial in recent years. I think there was this big boom, especially in contemporary American writing, and then everybody started to shy away from it. So maybe that is why I go to fictional memoir, just to avoid that whole sort of, I think that means something now.
Yeah, it is a strangely contentious or divisive term. And it's strange because there have always been forms of, I like your term, diaristic writing or fictional memoir. This has always kind of existed in some form, but the conversation became very loud recently.
Mm-hmm.
Something I noticed throughout Hi, It's Me in terms of voice, I loved the way you used conversational asides throughout the novel, where the novel kind of commentates on itself. For example, the narrator early on assures the reader that character names will sort themselves out, that she will address certain plot details later, and so on. Those are just two examples. But I was curious how you thought about voice as you were writing this book. How do you find that balance between narrative immersion and that kind of fun fourth wall breaking?
Yeah, I think because of the intimacy of it and sort of right off the bat, starting with a character with my full name, it felt like a bit of a betrayal to step back and pretend that we were in this world of the novel, which is often very clean and polished and separate from the author. And so I think because I already broke that down immediately, I just sort of wanted to feel like I was there with the reader, almost like I was bringing them into a room and showing them around. And so there is a narrative happening, but at the same time, there's this sort of like real-time correction of like, oh, and then there's this detail, and I forgot to tell you this. And I think it feels a lot more conversational, like friends talking. And I think anything else to me would have felt a bit too inauthentic in terms of building a novel out of my experience. And I think it was just very much my own voice right on the page.
Earlier, you mentioned playing with surreal conventions and like emotional realism, I suppose. And I read your craft essay in Event magazine called A Reason to Turn the Page, in which you talked about resorting to dream journaling when experiencing writer's block. So that's made me think of the kind of surreal elements which are at play in Hi, It's Me. And I was just curious, do your dreams make their way into your writing, or is the act of recording them more of a free writing exercise to get you started?
Yeah, I think they do sometimes, especially atmospherically. I mean, I talk about this in Hi, It's Me. I find it very embarrassing to talk about dreams. I think it's a very gendered thing that, women are always asking what their boyfriend's dreams are. And so I think I shy away from it, but I do, in my private life, just love them. I think they're really interesting fodder for fiction and for our own, like what's going on in our minds as we unpack our lives. So I do often borrow little atmospheric notes from dreams I have. I think Hi, It's Me is the first time I actually explicitly use dreams, and I write them out and they're footnoted. But yeah, I think I try to sort of use everything. If I overhear someone talking on the street, if I dream something, if I remember something. So they're definitely in that collage of material that I'm drawing from.
It's interesting, too, what you were talking about earlier with regards to voice and consciousness. Those are two of the kind of key tenets of the novel Hi, It's Me. And when you were talking about how you're sort of trying to put yourself on the page in some sense with that conversational style, it had me thinking about the fact that you're also in conversation with other books, like you pay homage to the modernist classics like Mrs. Dalloway and Ulysses throughout the novel. In terms of that approach to consciousness, there are those like amazing, expansive inner monologues throughout. And then there's also your use of the single day plot line. But as you say, this is also very much its own novel with a very personal voice and a personal set of contemporary preoccupations. So something else I was curious about is how you thought about homage and reference in terms of weaving that into your own perspective in the book.
I thought a lot about that. And overall, I think what I ended up doing with that was a bit of poking fun at myself and how small I feel when I do pay homage to something. Especially these classics like Ulysses is such a big part of the novel. I think it would just be silly for me to write a book that so reverently referenced these works and didn't really acknowledge the scale and the difference in scale. And so I think without humility, I think the book would fall apart. And so the way that this character is sort of drawing on all of these classic works, but just really not understanding them. Sometimes she hasn't read them. It's sort of her mother's world, literary novels. So yeah, I think the more that I included other works, the more my own book shrunk in my mind. And I think humor was really what that all hinged on.
You have a knack for describing characters in a manner that is simultaneously succinct and vivid. Here is an example from Hi, It's Me, quote, "He has the old-fashioned look of someone who might be painted into an ice skating scene or depicted on the cover of a middle-grade novel," unquote. So I'm curious, how do you arrive at these brief yet evocative character sketches? Do they come to you spontaneously, or do you squirrel them away as field observations for future use? Does a lot of your writing happen when you're sitting in front of the computer or the page, or do you kind of collect on a notes app in your phone? Like, how does the pipeline work for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I always sort of think of myself as like a really bad thinker, or I have a lot of mental blocks, and it's like the harder I try, the less is going to come to me. So I'm not really the type of person to have like a sort of, sprawling idea of a novel or put things together in my mind and then try to get them on the page. I almost learn what I'm writing as I write it. I think the actual motion of typing or writing with a pen is what allows my brain to focus. And I don't know if that's an attention problem or just how my mind works. And so descriptions like that, I think, are what come out as I try to figure out who a character is once I'm already stuck with them. And so with that boy that you're describing, I would have decided there's a little boy, this is what he's just done. He broke into the house and vandalized things. And then as I'm writing, I think I start to get an image of him, but it only becomes clear for me as I'm turning it into language. And I'm not the kind of person who can't picture things in my mind, but I think I can't create them very well unless I'm using language alone. I think that's definitely my most natural tool for creation.
Okay, interesting. I'm working on a novel for my thesis, master's at UNB. And I mean, like most writers, I suffer from imposter syndrome. And when I read another craft essay of yours called How to Write a Novel in a Month, and I was asking Mike over dinner yesterday, because I was like, Fawn says she writes 1,500 words a day. But like, I was asking Mike, like, do you do exploratory writing? Because like, if I write 1,500 words, it is very like expansive and kind of just like whatever comes to mind. Sometimes I write the same sentence out several times in a row in different ways. And I always feel like I'm cheating if I'm working towards a word count goal, because I'm accumulating too much and there's not much there. But maybe what you're saying about describing this little boy and trying to get it on the page, I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but it's interesting. Would you say that you're more like linear, like how Mike is when he writes, or do you do a lot of exploratory writing and that like counts towards your word goal, I suppose?
Yeah, I am linear, and I think I'm also very unforgiving of myself. So I feel the same as you. If I let myself explore, I could end up writing a whole page that I won't use. And if I'm doing what you're describing, where I'm writing 1,500 words a day, which is definitely something I don't do every month. It's, sometimes a very focused sort of project, but a lot of things don't count. So I feel the same in terms of, like, you described it as cheating. So anything that feels like it's going to get deleted doesn't count. Anything that's sort of note-taking doesn't count. It's very linear. It has to be able to fit into the novel. And I don't know how I really score it in my mind, but I think it has to be worthy of getting into the draft and will likely stay. And otherwise, I just sort of don't count it. So it is, I think, a very diligent process. It's very exhausting. It sounds like I am a bit like Mike in that way. I'm very linear in terms of starting at the beginning and writing through until I have a draft. And then I think that's when the painful part comes, is unwrapping all of that, working it out. I hate editing. I think writing is what I love, and editing is like the necessary consequence of that.
That actually reminds me, I had a question about your relationship to editing, because I read a quote in your interview with Rob McLennan, and I thought I have to ask Fawn about this, where you described the work of editing as, quote, hard for me, and I don't enjoy it the way I enjoy writing a first draft alone in my office. I found that relatable, but I also find that sometimes there can be this unique satisfaction in the editing process for me. I guess I was just curious about your relationship to editing generally.
Yeah, I think with editing, there's such a responsibility to the work and the reader that you're building tension, things have to make sense. Whatever you've given them at the beginning, I feel I'm often making promises. And so when I introduce a question, it's either going to be answered or the question itself is going to bring some sort of resolution or satisfaction. And all these things that I think are so important to think about in writing and in constructing something as hefty as a novel. But the writing process itself for me is just so free, and it flows out, and I can do anything, and I can get as weird as I want, and I never know what's going to happen. And it's very impulsive and fun for me when I'm writing, free writing. And then it's like, then the adult has to come in and edit the book. And I think that's, for me, the real work, and almost how I think of being a real writer is like, that's the work. And the free flowing part is almost just like running around in circles in your room and then you just have to sit with this big mess and make it into a book. So I think it is the work and I don't enjoy it, but I agree with you. It's satisfying to have done it, and I think makes me smarter and better and stronger.
So do you not outline at all then? That was another thing that was interesting to. Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah, I was curious about because you're a very diligent writer. I remember you saying that you have a kind of like daily regimented writing practice. So I was curious, well, I guess you just answered the question, you don't outline. So
well, I do actually clarify, sorry to interrupt you. I do eventually outline. I sort of get myself into deeper and deeper water writing, and then I panic and I force that onto an outline, and then I force that into a book. So I think those are the three stages, are like writing in a linear way, and then once enough is happening that it's a novel, I realize it's a total chaotic mess, and I clean it up into, I write like a chapter by chapter, like 1-page outline, and then I just make that work.
When you venture into a novel, do you always know this is going to be a novel, or does something sometimes start as a scene, or maybe you think, oh, this could be a short story and it becomes a novel? Or is there usually some sense there's something big I'm trying to get at here? This is going to take the shape of a novel, but I don't know what novel yet.
Yeah, I think previously, maybe 5 years ago, it was always the question, is this a short story? Is this a novel? What is it? And I think as I've made writing more of a career, I've found myself only writing novels and only really wanting to spend time with ideas that feel worthy of a novel. And I hope that's not the case forever, but if I'm not writing an interview or an essay, I tend to only really write a novel in terms of prose. I also write poetry, but I think that just became what I do and what I like.
How does character factor into that? Because I've also heard writers say that with a novel, especially, like, you have to know the characters. So, like, I find that I can outline a novel, but then sometimes the characters that I've developed for the novel wouldn't necessarily do the things that they need to do. I mean, of course, everyone's process is their own, but I'm always looking to learn from other writers. And I'm like, oh, it's kind of appealing to not start to set down plot beats until you know your characters better, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily what you're doing. So could you maybe speak a bit to how character factors in?
Yeah, I hope I have a helpful answer to this. I think part of what I love about writing is character, and I definitely don't feel that I'm often making decisions in that way, in the same way that I make plot decisions. I think sometimes plot has to be strategic and it has to make sense, and character for me, maybe because it's so exciting, just comes very naturally. And I love dialogue. I love putting two characters in conversation. That's my favorite way to write. But I often, I think, don't know a character or know the full spectrum of their personality until I've written them into a few scenes. And then once I have, it feels very clear in my mind what they would and would not do and what their voice sounds like. And I think, so I was just thinking if I should say this, but I spent my whole childhood very isolated, and I would talk out loud and have conversations, almost like writing dialogue, not thinking anyone was there, but just rehearsing interaction. And that became so natural to me that I think conversation is just something I love to produce in my mind, and I love to produce both sides. So I'm not sure if I have much insight into how I do that even. I just know I love that, and that's sort of like the beating heart of writing for me, is just what do people say, how do they react, and how does conversation work?
And that's interesting that you mentioned like childhood, because I find like when I think about staging conversations in my head, I think of adolescence. You know, you have a crush on someone and you like stage conversations in your head of some kind of scenario in which they like you back or whatever. Like, it is kind of playful and odd, but then now there's a totally sanctioned way to do it as an adult.
You didn't do that with Mike?
Oh yeah, I probably did. I mean, I have no shame.
Very cool.
I probably did, yeah. Anyways, moving on from our embarrassment. Although this will be a good segue, because this is about cringiness and embarrassment regarding the past. So in Hi, It's Me, the narrator, Fawn Parker, who is not necessarily you, but maybe you in some ways, she says, quote, "I flip through old manuscripts, and though they are bad, they are honest. Was I childish for thinking I could live inside of my passion forever?" Unquote. So how do you feel when you look at your old manuscripts and publications? And given how successful you are now, do you ever experience moments of doubt still?
I think out of necessity, I have had to embrace everything I've ever written and published, because I think otherwise I would just live with great regret that might crush me under its weight. But I think because I'm so thankful that I've had a publishing career and continue to, it's hard for me to regret anything that led up there, because I think there's such an obvious progression of early publications into longer works into where I am now, and just feeling very happy with my current publisher and agent. I think I would almost feel like I was jinxing it if I regretted anything along the way. That being said, I can't read my early novels. I think they're humiliating. So I just don't. And I trust that they're sort of something that had to happen. I think it would be like, loving my child and then looking at like a nude I sent to the father of my, just cut off how it started and appreciate the result. Sorry, what was the second part? Oh, how do I feel about, do I have any doubts? Yes, I constantly have doubts. The nature of my anxieties about writing change over time. I think early on it was this extreme panic to get a book out. I think Ben Lerner has talked about this, how the first novel, it's almost irrelevant what it is, you just have to do it. And then you can sit in the fact that you are now a writer and think about what kind of book you want to write for your second book. And I don't agree with all of that, but I understand that feeling of sort of urgency just to validate yourself and not feel like an imposter, as you said earlier. And I don't think you are an imposter. But yeah, I think at this point, my anxieties are all what I'm actually doing in a larger sense. And I don't think I questioned that as much early on. And now when I'm writing about a theme, is this actually helpful? Is this good to put out into the world? Having a bit more of a readership. I think about specific people and demographics and who tends to respond to my work. So I do feel, I think, more mature in my writing and more responsible, rather than just freely experimenting and being weird and provocative and kind of figuring out who I was.
That's extremely interesting to hear. It feeds into something I was curious about. I mean, one of the things you're talking about is the fact that you are now, fully inhabiting a career as a writer, and you've had a lot of critical and popular success. Part of what you're talking about too is this consciousness of the fact that there is going to be kind of like, at this point, there's a guaranteed readership for your work, I think. These are two separate questions, I guess. One of them is a broad one, and you can answer however you like, but how do you feel all the success has influenced or affected you as a writer, if at all? And another one was, how do you think the consciousness that one is going to be read affects one's approach to writing? Because I found that very interesting that you were saying, you're aware of who is going to be reading this as you're writing. I imagine that maybe in some cases it could be an impediment. It could also be helpful in some ways, but you can answer that however you'd like. That's a few questions bound up in one.
Yeah. First of all, I think it's just incredible to know, well, you never know for sure, but to sort of be able to feel a bit of safety in having a publisher, having multiple books with that same publisher, having an agent that I have a good relationship with. I think all of that is very much a privilege in the industry. But I think a lot of it is sort of, the spectrum grows on both sides. And so I do feel that my books are being read by more people now. That also means more people are leaving me 1-star reviews on Goodreads and saying, like, what is this bullshit? And so I think it's impossible not to be sort of equally humble no matter what happens in a career, because you're going to get both sides. I think what was really hard for me, which is a funny way to describe this, but when I was nominated for the Giller in 2022, nothing like that had ever happened to me. I never thought anything like that would ever happen to me. And that was very paralyzing in terms of what I would write next, because it felt like I had to either maintain that level of national awareness or get higher. And I just didn't know how to do that, because I was writing books about like Jordan Peterson and sex work, and I had never pictured myself being part of that area of Can Lit. And so I think entering that all of a sudden took me by surprise a lot, and I didn't know what I would write next. And so at this point, I think I'm aware that I'm being read by more people, but I know a lot of older white women in Ontario really hate my work, and I'll see that on Goodreads, day after day, and that just really, it's not something I think about when I'm writing, but it's something I know is going to happen. And so I think that's like a safeguard against ever thinking I'm anything important. It just keeps me, working very hard.
My current anxiety, I wonder if this is an anxiety that either of you have experienced and if it will go away, because my present anxiety is I spend I say no to a lot of things. I say, oh, sorry, I can't hang out, I can't do this, I can't do that, I have to write. And then I think, what if it's all for nothing? Like, what if I picture myself on my deathbed, and like, what if I have no friends because I spent all my time writing these stupid little stories and they never went anywhere, and I isolated myself. And I know, Fawn, that you mentioned, I didn't write it down, so I don't have the exact quote, and I can't remember because you're so prolific in terms of writing craft essays, but you mentioned like that writing is a way for you to connect with others, like that you have made friends through your writing. You've like once you're kind of established, once you have a publisher, does it kind of go away, this fear that you're like shirking other life responsibilities?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. No, and I think that's something I feel very similar to you about. I worry that I've put everything into something, and what that means, and all the sacrifices I've made socially. I looked back recently at my 20s. I just turned 31, and I just thought, like, how much time did I spend in my office in that decade, when I think a lot of my peers were like having a great time and partying, and I still went out, and I have a lot of friends I love a lot, but the primary focus of every single day of the past decade has been work. I would make that choice over again, but I agree with you. It does take a lot of risk and sacrifice because you don't know if it's going to work out. I don't know. I guess my view has always been it just has to, and maybe that's not very helpful, and that could lead to a lot of loss and consequence. But I think as a very young child, I just decided this is all I want to be. This is who I am, and I'll just do it aggressively until it works out. And then, I don't know, hopefully it just does for anyone who approaches it that way. And I think you do have a social, I've seen you out. You still have a social.
Yeah, it's like
you're at that 8-hour reading.
That's right. I lasted to the end.
Yeah, that's a lot of time away from writing.
I know, right?
It's like a month's worth in one night. Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, it kind of made me hallucinate towards the. I was like just giggling, it was a drug like experience. So
I know. I still worry that I'm like still there and I haven't realized it.
Yes. I'll throw this question in there because it might be redundant now, but in A Reason to Turn the Page, your craft essay in Event magazine, you profess an inability to relax. I think that's fair to say that you profess that. You share an anecdote about visiting the Hopewell Rocks and insisting on staying in the car and working on your novel instead of sightseeing. As a fellow writer, I guess I already said this to you, this compulsion toward constantly working resonates with me. Do you find it difficult to protect your writing time? And do you have any anxieties about taking time away from it? If you have anything new to add.
Well, I think your first question, do I have trouble protecting my writing time? No, I think I'm maybe a bit too good at that. And it sounds like you are as well. That's the first thing I do in a day. I always protect it. I sort of don't feel like a day is happening or going until I've already worked. So for me, that's very easy and very natural and something I've developed. I was doing that as like a 13-year-old, which I'm sure is unhealthy and related to why I'm in therapy now. But what was the other thing you asked? You asked a second question that was really interesting.
Like, do you get anxious if like if say someone said, no, you can't, like you have to do X today?
I do. Yeah, I think I struggle a lot with that every day in different ways. If there's a day that I just don't have time or like have a wedding or an event that I can't miss, I definitely feel it as a weight on me. I think some people feel this about if they don't exercise in a day or if they don't clean up, something like that. I think we often have sort of, necessities to feel like ourselves. I think as I've aged, I've gotten better at doing that for a day, for something important like a wedding. I was quite sick this winter for longer than I have been, and I didn't work for a really long time. And I found I almost felt like I was just like disintegrating into this like fine mist. I didn't know who I was. I felt like I had no substance. It was like, what is my value even? Like, am I interesting? Am I funny? Do I have anything other than being a writer? Which I think are important questions to ask yourself, because of course we all are. But yes, I think I exist so strongly in my writing practice that there's not much else out there, or at least not that I'm aware of and not that I value other than other people. So yeah, I struggle. I was trying to like turn this into an optimistic helpful thing, but no, I just really have a hard time. Yeah. Relaxing, not a hard time in general.
I have a hard time relaxing too. I mean, I was kind of the person who in my 20s was probably not partying hard or anything, but like was a people pleaser. So that certainly negatively impacted my ability to write. And now I'm course correcting, maybe overcorrecting sometimes. But Mike and I both love Joyce Carol Oates. Just think she's like an interesting transgressive writer. And she talks about like, she just works every day. Like she can't relax. And when I hear other people, you know, just work all the time or feel like they're disintegrating into a fine mist if they don't do it, I actually do find it up to, because I think, okay, I'm not the only person who enjoy it. Because it's, you know, some people say like, it's not work, it's play, which I don't love to say because I don't know, maybe I'm a bit intent on being an adult. So, Fawn, I will choose to take it in an optimistic fashion.
Fawn, you're a good example for listeners or for readers. You demonstrate that hard work and discipline and craft is all part of it. You're successful for a reason, and your books are excellent for a reason. In a way, it kind of does demystify, because you can hear, okay, the thing to do is to put the hours into. And I really think in a way that's helpful to hear, that it's a matter of sitting down every day to do the work. And to sometimes I find that demystification actually quite helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. And I think putting in the hours, it's hard to even know what that means when you're starting out, or it was for me. And so I ended up putting in hours everywhere that I could. I was volunteering for magazines. I was getting internships. I was applying for grants, I was running magazines, I was hosting events. I just sort of did every single literary or literary adjacent thing I could think of constantly, and then saw what stuck. And I think I wouldn't have known without the actual trial and error process of getting there what a writing career looks like and what you can say no to around that sort of orbits around. But I do think it's a good idea for someone feeling like they want to enter the industry to just sort of find any entry point that you can, and then just like feel your way in. I think there's a lot of similar things you can do, and you can get involved in a community and meet people, and it'll just sort of, you will demystify it for yourself, I think, as you step forward into it.
You're talking about meeting people and making connections and being part of the community. I do think you're uniquely adept at that. You're also very charitable and generous with your time. Like, you run the monthly catch-up reading series in Fredericton, for example. You do a lot to engage with and support other writers. Yeah, how do you find that balance? How do you find that balance between being an active member of the community, but also carving out, I guess this is, again, is a question of time. Like it does feel from the outside like you're doing it all the time. It's kind of, it's impressive, and sometimes it's intimidating. I'm like, how does she do it?
Yeah, I think it's hard, and it is too much objectively, but I really struggle with when I start to feel the balance shift into things I do for myself versus things I do for other people. I think existentially it gets a bit gray for me. I think writers are extremely important, and I wouldn't be here without literature. It's like everything that I feel about the world, I think I channel through understanding books and what writers say and how they view the world. But it's hard to think that about myself, and I don't think anyone should think that about their own work. And so to balance that and sort of the guilt I feel about having a bit of a navel-gazing career is, what can I do for other people, whether it's other writers or just people in general? And I think occupying those positions of mentorship and helping and teaching really offsets how much time I spend thinking about myself and my own ideas. I think things just get a bit weird when all you do is appreciate your own thoughts and sell them to people. So yeah, I do like to achieve a bit of a balance there.
Well, I guess another dimension there too is the fact that you're very close to finishing your PhD in creative writing at the University of New Brunswick. How does the academic environment and routine and life play into your writing? Do you think it's of benefit? Can it be a hindrance? Maybe a bit of both? Does it change?
It changes for sure. And I'm not sure I have a lot of thoughts in general about academic creatives, but it's always felt like sort of a game of chicken in my life. I've never been a confident academic. I always generally think I'm quite an unintelligent person, and I'm not sure yet if that's true, but I think that making my way through my master's degree and then my PhD is just sort of seeing if I can do it, because I always thought I couldn't. And it's really, really good paid writing time. I love being around other academics and just people who are very cerebral. I think those are my people. So I kind of appreciate all the benefits that come with it, but I don't naturally take to the actual work at its core. And that's just something that I have to accept as part of the package. But in terms of time, it's been a bit crazy sometimes. Like, I'm sure the same for you with the comprehensive exams. Reading 100 books and trying to write a book at the same time is weird, but I could like feel myself, my brain just like got 10 times smarter reading that much and thinking in that way and being tested. So I think entering the PhD, it felt very frivolous. And now that I've actually done it, I was very humbled by how much value I think I've gotten out of it.
Well, first of all, we think you're highly intelligent. We were a little intimidated after we read Hi, It's Me. We were like, wow, she's so smart. I hope she doesn't think we're buffoons on her podcast. But a couple of bumbling oafs. I mean, I'm doing my master's, not my PhD, so I'm not exposed to the hazing ritual of the comp, but being exposed to things that you would not normally read seems like, because like you brought up Ben Lerner earlier. I was just watching an interview with him and he said something like, a good rule of thumb to try to get into some reading that you wouldn't normally, or like some writers that you would not normally pick up, is to look at your favorite writers and look at who they were inspired by and try to go through the genealogy of that. With the comps or just in general, have you ever had any like big surprises in terms of just like, what are some odd influences that maybe people would not read into your work but might surprise them to know?
Well, I don't know how odd this is. I think the book that stayed with me the most from my comprehensive exams was The Mountain in the Valley by Ernest Buckler. And I definitely wouldn't have naturally gravitated toward that. It follows a young boy through to adulthood and is bookended by the reader's knowledge that he will die at the top of this mountain. He spends his whole life looking out the window at the mountain and dreams about getting there and dies at the top. But it's just such beautiful writing and so atmospherically strong and everything I really love about any book. And this character is just so complex. I could be talking about any book right now. This is what everybody says, you know, uproarious, a strong debut. But I love that book so much. And I found it through suffering through the CanLit comprehensive exam. I sort of had to teach myself about the history of Canada. I never knew or cared, I'm embarrassed to say. And so I learned all about that. And I mean, I knew it was horrific and it just solidified how horrific it was. But yeah, I think it was probably that book, and I shouldn't say this, but The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood was like life-changing. And I know we're mixed on her, but in terms of craft, a genius. Political opinions, no comment.
What's a piece of writing advice that really stuck with you for better or for worse?
Yeah. Maybe this isn't a good answer to your question. It's not necessarily a piece of advice, but I think anytime somebody has edited my work and given an idea as the solution rather than pointed to a problem, I think that is terrible writing advice. Because I don't think an editor should come in and exchange. I think they should open up areas that need you to do something as the writer and sort of, you know, show where there are gaps or confusion or information missing or a sentence that's not working. But I think when somebody in a workshop or an editor reads something and says, I'm going to need this character to do this, or I need this person to be switched out, or they shouldn't say this here, they should say XYZ, that's just another writer in the seat. And I think there's only room, maybe this is so subjective, but I just always feel that the writer is the writer and an editor can guide that person or point out what's not working, but doesn't need to get into the writer's chair. So I guess that would be the advice that sticks with me, is always when that line is crossed into just rewriting.
I mean, through doing this podcast, Mike and I have learned a lot about other people's processes. And we had one guest, Maurice Meyer, who she has an identical twin who I think they kind of are very, very close. Mike and I have adapted their process, which is like they read a piece like sentence by sentence aloud to each other and make recommendations. And I'll do that with Mike because we're so close and so similar that I don't mind if he offers solutions, but I don't think I would want them from anyone else who I know yet. I mean, maybe I'll meet someone someday, but Mike's my soulmate, so hopefully not. Have you ever had a kind of mind meld with another writer where you would like allow them to sit in the writer's chair for you, or are you like have like strong boundaries about that?
Yeah, I think I do have strong boundaries by necessity, not because I don't trust other people. Like in terms of the editorial process, my editor, Kelly Joseph, I trust with anything. I would take any advice she has, and I think she's brilliant. But before something is ready for that stage of edits and is already under contract, I think it just feels so vulnerable and so delicate and personal that it's just not something I can handle, whether it's positive or negative. I just don't think, I don't know, I think privacy for me is so important, and it feels like such a close, like it reminds me, I don't want to get too into like a therapy session, but my mother was always just like really criticizing me so close, like micro facial expressions, being like, what are you doing with your face? And I think that feeling of having something totally safe from any scrutiny is exactly what drew me to writing, is like, this is a world where I can do what I want and no one's looking. So I think as a coping mechanism, even into my 30s, I just need that before I'm ready to sort of show myself. A book is such a huge part of ourselves. So yeah, I think even if I trusted someone enough, like of course I trust my partner with anything, I don't think that it's helpful for me to get advice yet until it's sort of more firm in what it is.
Yeah, like it makes sense to protect. Like as a child, I mean, I can get a little therapy speak too, I guess. Like my mom used to say like that I didn't give enough attention to other children. Like I was very insular. And part of writing is reclaiming that, building something that I think is worth my time all by myself and taking pleasure in it and thinking that it's cool or exciting. But all that to say, yeah, we did have another guest, Paula Ash, who was talking about, I'm like highly offline, so I think she was referencing a meme I've never seen, but an idea of like, you might have like a full, beautiful painting of a horse in your mind, but if you show it to someone in its gestational period, it might look like a stick drawing to them and make you really doubt yourself. And I know that you have an analogy. Once again, this How to Write a Novel in a Month, I would recommend to any listeners. Great craft piece, even if not everyone can. I get that it's you're sharing your process. It's not.
Yeah, no pressure. I don't think it's a good idea.
You have this analogy that I loved so much about not passing the baby around the room. And I was wondering for our listeners if you could explain what you mean by that. And also maybe tell us at what point you would pass your baby, or I don't know, maybe toddler by that point around the room.
I think what I was getting at there was that, I mean, exactly, you said it very well with the horse painting. I think before something is ready to be critiqued, I think you can critique it out of existence. And it's hard to show somebody a draft and include everything that you intend to do and everything you meant to do and everything that will get cleaned up in edits. And I think sometimes that noise is just so harmful to the creative process, and adding that layer of self-consciousness. I've definitely given drafts of things to people and they just point out like a grammatical error on the first sentence. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing here. It's like, this is my precious, beautiful work and you're like poking holes in it already. So I think for me, it's just anything that impedes that free flow is just something I really try to avoid. Because once you start thinking like, oh, well, my ex-boyfriend thought that this woman character was unlikable, like, fuck off. It doesn't matter. I think like grow the thing, to continue with the baby analogy, like keep it protected in the womb until it's ready for the cruel, horrible world that it's going to enter. And then like, the first thing a baby does is cry. It's like very traumatic to be born. So I think you have to prepare your book for the trauma of edits and the whole process it's going to go through.
Your commitment to craft is evident, as we've talked about before. I mean, the quality of your writing is just so pure, it's so distilled, and you obviously have a lot of formal control over rendering on the page. And obviously we've heard a lot about the diligence of your process. So I'm curious, do you do much research on the kind of theoretical elements regarding craft? Do you enjoy reading about other writers' processes? And if so, do you have any personal favorites?
Yeah, I do. I think what I'm really drawn to is sort of the frivolous elements. Like I like to know if writers write at a certain time of day or like what they eat or what they wear. I always love knowing like what Joan Didion looked like when she was writing and in what room she was in. And I think she's really good at including those details in when she does write about her real life. I guess I have grown up just romanticizing the non-writing elements of being a writer. And so the idea of being like Susan Sontag and writing and having a glass of wine and looking like her, it just like, I guess it's a way of like method acting my way into believing that I could be a real writer, whatever that means. But in terms of actual theory on writing, I don't read a lot. I love that novel On Write, or sorry, it's not a novel, it's a craft book called On Writing a Novel. He has the most classic white person name ever. I can get that for you. It's John something.
It's not James Wood, probably not.
It's James Wood.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking he has a very white person name, so.
Yeah, that's who it is. I love his book. It's just like, it's so simple. I think I often need like the kindergarten version of advice. It's just like, this is what plot is, this is what a book is. And that is really a language I speak. And then once you get into like Frederick Jameson theorizing on contemporary novels, like my brain is just melting.
Absolutely. I can relate to that. I read How Fiction Works by James Wood, the person who writes for the New Yorker. Yeah, that really, I like things that are very technical. Like I like it to be demystified. I believe I said that before, but this kind of relates to one of the first questions Mike asked you about Hi, It's Me. Like something that as of late I've been obsessing about in my own writing, and I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this, is like the conceit of writing, especially if it's first person, actually only if it's first person, is that a person is either thinking out loud, like it's epistolary, or like, if it's past tense, it's always happening. Like, you have to pick basically a point in the future and then a point in the past and collapse the distance between them. And so like Hi, It's Me was so, am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it Hi, It's Me because of the comma?
Every person that has interviewed me so far has said, hello, it's me. So you're already like way ahead of me.
Excellent. Okay. It's the title. Come on. No offense to anyone that's interviewed you. But yeah, like when you write first person, do you either of you like, it's just such a weird fiction in itself too. I've just become too hung up on it and it's kind of stressing me out lately.
Yeah, it is stressful because it's impossible. I guess other than the future or like present tense writing about the past, first person present tense is an impossible tense unless you were like the writer walking through your day writing, I'm exiting the door, I'm walking down the, it's sort of the way a novel unfolds makes that tense. You have to kind of submit to it in that abstract sense. I don't know. I'd be interested, Mike, what you think about that.
I don't know. I usually just sort of have an instinct going into a project, like this is the tense, this is the POV. I loved the way you used first person present tense and Hi, It's Me. As you were describing your approach to voice in the novel, it makes perfect sense. Like that was the perspective for that book, I think. The story I'm currently writing, I drafted it in first person. Short stories, I never really know the ending in advance. Novels, I have to. But I realized at the end of this story, the protagonist sort of fades away or disintegrates. And I'm thinking, well, it can't be first person past tense because she's gone. So there's these kind of formal problems. I'm like, where is she writing? I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but to some extent it does. Sometimes it has changed for me. Has that ever happened to you, Fawn? Like I've entered something thinking it would be first and it actually switched to third. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think almost always with a novel, maybe not always, often with a novel, it does switch until I find it. Yeah, that's so interesting. You're right about if the character disappears, then it can't be past. Because then there's the idea that if it is past tense, the character knows what's going to happen. And then there's a dishonesty with anything surprising that happens. It's like, you already knew that was going to happen. Why didn't you tell me on page 1? There are all these issues with each tense that maybe I didn't consider when I first started writing that now are very important in terms of if I'm revealing things slowly and I'm first person, why would you trust me? And if it's third person, how do we know so much in terms of the omniscient? Yeah, it is interesting. I think narration is sort of this weird suspension of disbelief that we have to do often.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the magic of it, I guess. It's fun to work in a medium that has that in it. Now that we're speaking about it, like I always think, well, what do filmmakers do? I'm not really like a gamer, but I'm like fascinated by video game grammar because it is more POV oriented. Like you can have a first person shooter, you can have like, I was really interested in like survival horror games and the construction of these kind of waif like avatars for a while and how they're kind of, there's like a leering camera always following them. So yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that it's just a mystery, but obviously, yeah, Hi, It's Me was like really inspiring in terms of this kind of suspension of disbelief and calling the reader in. I find it comforting to read things where they're experimental in terms of, because it can be playful and fun if you kind of let yourself not think about what it ought to be like. And I mean, obviously, James Wood, we were talking about earlier, how fiction works. It's really good, but it's fairly prescriptive, and he's pretty vicious.
Yeah, very much what it ought to be like. I think that should be the title of the book.
Yeah, definitely. That's my mic just yesterday was like, I've been using the word ought a lot lately. So it's a very...
Which I never do normally, but...
That's how you know you're intelligent.
Yeah, totally.
I think it means I'm being institutionalized or brainwashed.
Yes, maybe. Well, you're nearly a PhD. I think that's when the switch happens.
God. Man, oh man. Fumbling my way through. Smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors.
Oh yeah, me too. Miriam, I don't know you as well. Are you also interested in genre and horror?
That's a good question. I mean, we were talking about growing pains earlier. I think I've been kind of uncovering and feeling more comfortable. I'm in a prose workshop with Kesha Von Skyke, who's excellent. It's like such a fun workshop. But I had a story from the perspective of a kind of incel. And earlier you were talking about like Jordan Peterson. And I'm very interested in the nature of evil, or the nature of, not even, but like, I mean, evil meaning like greed or like misogyny, whatever. So I'd kind of dark fiction, transgressive fiction. Like I really like Mary Gateskill and Joyce Carol Oates and Shirley Jackson, just kind of the ugly parts of human nature. But I'm also interested in like folklore and stuff. So I'd say, yeah, I'm not a horror writer, but like sometimes in terms of marketing myself, I think I'd be better off trying to lean more into horror, because most of my writing, like I said, is quite, I wouldn't call ugly, but quite transgressive. Not on purpose. It's not intentional, but I do feel as though that's how Mike and I initially met, because I was like, I knew he wrote literary horror, but like it's hard to find a home for those things. So yeah, I mean, I write like dark fiction.
Have you read Rejection, that short story collection, either of you? By Tony Teletamudi, I think his name is. Anyway, it's all about incels. I think, Miriam, you'd love it.
Oh,
I also love
yes.
incels. They're fascinating to me.
Yeah.
My follow-up question, the reason I asked about horror is because I wonder how you feel, either of you, sort of being in both worlds, like very knowledgeable and well-read in literary fiction and also horror. I know nothing about genre fiction, and what literary fiction looks like from a perspective. Let's say you're in more of your horror mode, what literary fiction looks like from the outside, because I'm so steeped in it, I can't see anything else. I feel like I'm blind to what it is. Do you see it as, is it a genre to you?
Probably most writers are similar in the sense that I don't like start writing something thinking I am now going to write a gothic horror story. You're just writing, and what comes out of you is what comes out. So I guess the question is different from me as a reader versus me as a writer. But yeah, I would argue that capital L literary fiction can be a sort of genre that follows its own set of conventions, its own set of formal conceits and things. It's such a difficult question to answer. Like, how do we define genre?
I could take a crack at it, I guess. Not that there's a right or wrong answer, but like I'm very interested in, I always read like the headlines of New York articles and actually don't dive in, so I don't feel qualified to talk about this, but the history of attitudes towards suspense. If I recall correctly, when like Dickens started publishing and doing like cliffhangers, it was kind of considered to be a cheap trick. But I do think that there can be a lot of suspense built into literary fiction, and it doesn't need to be genre. Like I think there was a lot of suspense in your novel, and I know some people love it, some people hate it, but The Guest by Emma Cline, Mike and I both really liked. It kind of reads like a horror novel, maybe a connection to draw between genre and literary. And I'm much less steeped in genre. I really like to try to find things that toe the line, and there's no like metadata for that, so it can be a little difficult. I think it's Douglas Glover, so the Canadian writer who wrote a book that I really like on craft called Attack of the Copula Spiders. I think he says good characters, like good as in well-written characters, are obsessive compulsive, and poorly written characters are passive aggressive. And he doesn't really fully flesh out what he means by that, but I think I get the gist. Like Mike and I are watching the OC right now, and Marissa Cooper is a great example of a passive aggressive character, and she's quite boring to watch, in my humble opinion. Sorry to any fans out there, but
she's my soulmate, the way that Mike
oh
is
yeah,
yours.
she's your TV girlfriend is Marissa Cooper. She needs someone who is in charge to kind of yeah.
You need somebody diligent.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I don't like her either. I remember that show.
Well, we were watching melodrama, and then I was like, oh my God, the OC is the best modern melodrama. Anyways, all this to say, I think in your novel and in like Ben Lerner's novel, Tessa Moshfegh, I guess, I'm like obsessed with this one short story. I don't know if you know Tessa Hadley. She's like kind of a very slice of life writer, but she has this one short story called Experience. It was published in New Yorker, and it's about this woman who's like renting another woman's house, and she like finds this key to the woman's attic, and inside of the woman's attic is all the stuff that she kind of like obviously put there because she was like embarrassed by it, like porn DVDs and like sex toys and her diaries that like elaborate on this affair she's having with a married man. And then the married man comes to the place to like look for the owner and finds the tenant, and the tenant adopts like in a creepy way, like starts acting like she thinks that the owner would act. And yeah, I'll stop now. I guess I was really excited by your question, Fawn, but like to me that's like a horror. I often read horror into literary stuff, and I think it's often when it is that kind of obsessive compulsive character who is just like frightening to you, like you don't know what they're going to do, you don't know what they're capable of. And to me that's the X factor, and that elides genre, so it makes it harder for me to find things that I get really excited about, but when I find it I get excited.
Yeah, I can see how that would be hard. I don't think we have a vocabulary yet for that kind of sort of nuanced blend. I almost, as a total outsider, so I might be wrong about this, but I always viewed horror especially as permission to stop pleasing the audience in terms of writing what they might call believable characters or good characters. I think so much of, I don't want to say this in a way that's condescending, a lot of very general reading, or what you might call like book club readers, or just people who aren't engaging for difficult intellectual reasons, I think view books in a different way than maybe academics do, where they just want to see something that they agree with or has a good moral or feels good to them, or they would be friends with the character. And it's the type of engagement I just don't relate to at all, coming away and saying like, I can't believe he did that, therefore I hate the book. And so I feel like horror is a way for that kind of reader to almost lift that off of themselves and enjoy something without worrying that it's immoral or somehow staining them. And that's what I would appreciate about the horror genre, is like we can all just stop questioning whether it's okay and enjoy that it's good writing or interesting writing.
I mean, it's the only genre named after its self-announcing affect, which is in itself interesting to me. If it's built into the genre, it's going to in some way navigate around this affect or this emotional experience. I think that's really the only core tenet, but there's so many things you can do with that affect. Like you can inhabit the object of horror, you can apprehend the object of horror, you can, I think the most boring genre fiction tends to be, it's the sort of fiction that just reassures the reader of a kind of simplistic worldview, like there's a threat to this simplistic worldview, but don't worry, it's reestablished at the end. But I find at its most interesting and exciting, what horror can do is completely destabilize our assumptions or our customary ways of looking at things. Because I think affect can kind of disarm that intellectual apparatus in ways that I find very exciting, which you can also do that in literary fiction. You can do that in literary fiction as well, I think. But this is part of the reason the distinctions can get muddy. Like there's a lot of horror fiction that I would say is quite literary. And there's also some really kind of lowbrow, simplistic literary fiction. So it's like, what defines a genre? Is it just certain like formal features? Is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Even The Edible Woman, I think, is sort of a horror novel. It's kind of a body horror novel, really.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder if this is so reductive, but I was just thinking in terms of genre, it's like horror relies on surprise and suspense. So does humor. And then something like erotica in another genre relies on hitting necessary marks and not being surprising. I don't know, maybe the average erotica reader wants to be shocked, but yeah, I don't think enough about genre to say anything intelligent about it.
No, that is very intelligent and that's very interesting. Yeah, because you're right, like romance, erotica, there's like a contract between the writer and the read. I mean, I don't read a lot of it, but like I imagine there's an expectation that it will like build, like it's kind of orgasmic or whatever. Earlier, Fawn, kind of unrelated, but you had mentioned the likability of a character. And maybe the contract between reader and writer with horror is that you don't have to be as polite. I use Goodreads just because I like to feel like I'm productive. But I know that on Storygraph, which I do not use, there's like a meter. There's all this kind of metadata, and one is like likability of character, which I take to be, it's hard because like if you want to write a character that's unlikable, it's like how unlikable can I go before people tune out or get upset? I don't know if that actually happens or not, but
yeah, totally. Yeah, like how much can I dislike this person before I just don't even want to read the book? I think there must be a certain line. It's probably a personal line for each of us, but yeah, actually in my dissertation, Kash's most recent note to me was this character might be so unlikable that a reader won't turn the page or will skip his sections. And I thought that was really necessary to hear, that I've almost overdone it into the caricature versus somebody that you don't like. I think it becomes somebody that you don't believe. And that's maybe where the line is as long as you believe them, you can hate them. But if they become just like funny because of how horrible they are, maybe that's not as interesting.
Fawn, have you read anything recently that's particularly excited you?
The most exciting to me is very relevant to what I'm working on right now. And I won't reveal that, so I won't say why, but I'm reading Libra by Don DeLillo. And I mean, everything he writes is exciting to me, but I just love that book.
We found a first edition of that book at Salvation Army. It was a pretty exciting find, but
can you put that in your will for me? I'm going to outlive you in case I do.
Absolutely. I'm scared to touch the first edition because it's in mint condition, but maybe I'll get it on my Kobo and read it.
Yeah. No trace.
Where can our listeners find you, if you would like them to find you, that is?
To find me. Well, don't find me in person, but if you can find me online, I would say, oh God, I just shut everything down. I've got like a private Instagram. I have sort of an inactive Twitter with like 30 followers, and that is Fawn C.G. Parker.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Fawn. It was so great to chat with you about craft.
Yeah, it flew by.
We both loved Hi, It's Me. It's one of the standout reads
Genuinely.
I've had, and brilliant. So
I saw that I made the Mike Thorne list on Twitter. That was very exciting.
The great list maker. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Fawn. We appreciate your time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.